Hey guys, I believe this is the second installment of the podcast discussions of Schiller's on the Aesthetic Education of Man. We did an introductory sort of smattering last week, and I went back over the tape, and I think we did a pretty good job. And though we talked about a lot of things I wasn't really prepared to talk about, we sort of drew a lot of connections between Schiller and Nietzsche, and we brought in on the spot. I sort of had to sort of generate some background information of Kant, and I've got actually a little bit more that I'm going to talk about today because I had to do a little bit of research. But in my estimation, we did cover, maybe in a roundabout way, some of the main ideas of the first three letters. Mm-hmm. Now, we talked just for a little bit before we went live here, and you thought, I think you were sort of prepared just to talk through the third letter, and you thought there was some stuff that we hadn't covered. So I think what we should probably do is we should probably take turns discussing what maybe we didn't do well enough or didn't cover enough of in that initial offering.
Sure.
And I can go first, or you can go first.
Or we can go at the same time
or
and just
trade.
see what, just have a conversation.
Okay.
I mean, I think one thing we have to know is that he's setting a stage, at least in these first letters. Is that, I mean, of course, like you said in the past, that he talked about Kant, but he also talks about how the world, at least he's living in, is in this state of political unrest. So, I mean, I think that's something important to talk about, because there has to be some kind of necessity, or not some necessity, but there has to be some kind of reason that he wants to talk about this utopian vision of the aesthetic making a just society. So, at least if I recall, he does in these first three letters express this concern for the times and that we need some kind of
So you want to address some of the historical context, like what was actually going on in Europe at that particular time?
If it would help. I mean, I can't remember. But all I remember is that he talked about them very vaguely, and he didn't really express what it was. But
presumably, I mean, Europe's not monolithic.
No.
That there are going to be different states of revolution, and we need to do a little bit. I need to do a little bit of background for this in order to contextualize the talk that I'm going to be giving at the Goethe Institute on Schiller, is to think, precisely what the scope of his range was. But needless to say, there's sort of a revolutionary spirit in the air about sort of reformational efforts to get the government to look more like the just state. And there are going to be some countries within Europe that are closer to that ideal than others, and every situation is going to be a little bit different. So we might be a little bit unprepared to talk about the historical specificity of it, but I think we did a pretty decent job about talking about the tension that was going on in currently existing. I think we covered this in the last one, but I don't know if we did this well enough. But I don't think it hurts to reiterate it. That essentially that men everywhere were sort of waking up to this idea that they didn't have to be imprisoned by the physical state that's imposed upon them, the natural or the dynamic state. They didn't have to just accept being low in the hierarchy of a monarchy or something like that. That they could actually romanticize the notion of there being an ideal and just state, and what that actually is going to draw a lot on a lot of political theorists that are going on at that time. Now, Schiller, we talked about him being a type of Kantian. I looked actually into this a little bit because I was not really able to speak about what that looked like from, and maybe I should divulge that.
Yeah, because the first letter is kind of a advertisement for Kant. It seems he's just like, Kant is the way. So go into that.
And the last thing I was able to talk about, that what it means to be a Kantian is very difficult to say, because Kant wrote about a multiplicity of things, and
but there has to be some kind of lens through which he sees these multiplicity of things.
I think for Schiller in this text, he's very concerned about what it means to be an ethical Kantian, which I think I did a good job of explicating. And essentially, that's going to be someone who subscribes to the categorical imperative, which has at least three different formulations, but talking about whether or not your action can be turned into universal law, and if it admits of a contradiction, you can't do it, and it means treating people as ends of themselves and not as means. But ultimately, but I didn't really have a good idea of what Kant had to say about the political structure that he wanted. I knew his ethical theory decently, but I didn't really know what that political structure did. And I did a little bit of research on this last night, and this is by no means exhaustive, and it will probably help us answer some of the historical contextualization issues.
Okay.
Because the reason why this is by no means exhaustive is that Kant, within discussing political theory, from my readings, now I just did a research on like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which I highly recommend as an internet resource for figuring this stuff out, is that he wrote on like so much minutia involving the just state. But in general, the just state that Schiller subscribes to is the Kantian vision, and in general, from what I understand, that's a republican form of government, okay, and that ultimately that individuals within that government are going to have a role for that in that society that's not going to be predetermined based on how much wealth their family had or their station in life or what. Ultimately, it's going to mean total equality. And in order to have total equality, that's going to mean that everyone has the exact same rights. And so that this is like, and that seems totally obvious to us, but this is still novel social contract talk at the time at which Schiller and Kant is writing. Like, you know, and Kant's saying this stuff like in his 80s or in his like or 70s or whatever. And, you know, that's pretty radical for a guy in his 70s to be talking about, who was raised, you know, in a more monarchical structure.
Yeah, and we also have to know too that talking about like social contract, like people like Rousseau as well, because I think Schiller starts with a quote from Rousseau. So I mean, we have that whole idea too, like the state of, and he goes into, at least I think it was the second letter, about the state of nature. And it's interesting though, because he says it's more of an ideal. It's more of something in your mind. Yeah, you don't really, that man doesn't really experience it. But to go back, I guess, to what you said.
But I think Kant is trying to recapture that in some way. The really interesting thing, and there's, like I said, there's a lot of levels to the ideal state that Kant was trying to put out there. From what I understand, he not only wanted a just state that would allow individuals to flourish, to sort of harness their individual capacities, which we'll see Schiller talk about the bunch of different capacities that man has, but to really flourish and develop those. But I think the big thing that Kant wanted to make sure didn't happen was needless war. And I think something that Kant and Schiller both witnessed is that just scores and scores of men were just sent off to die unnecessarily between these little disputes between monarchs or whatever. And so the revolutionary spirit of the time is to make sure that all individuals, if war is ever going to be something that people get involved on, that it has the consent of the people. So that's why it's got to be a Republican sort of setup, is that so that, you know, people aren't just wasting, like you just don't have legions of men wasting their lives over petty land disputes between monarchs. And that apparently that was a big problem at this particular epoch in time. Maybe that addresses some of the historical, even though I can't speak to like the particular figureheads or whatever, but that's gonna, I think, a lot of what's animating is Schiller is, and what's the really crazy thing about what Kant was doing is that essentially he wanted all nations to embrace this program. So he was, you can see the kernel of the UN in Kant's political, you can see where the idea of a League of Nations and a United Nations is essentially emerging out of the political thought of Kant that Schiller is going to be endorsing as the ultimate, what art is going to be helping to bring into existence. So I hope that
I think that's awesome.
Helps.
Yeah, no, I think that really helps.
Cool. So,
so I'm curious though whether you see, I guess, this Kantian utopia idea in the first 5 letters or so, or at least in the glimpse that we're looking at within this podcast. Do you see any kind of semblance of this idea coming to the forefront yet, or is there time? Because I mean, Schiller is very patient in this text with giving us information and details.
Yeah, I see. I'm working on the entirety of this talk, and I think Schiller, from what I can tell from this text and my notes and the lecture series I've already done, from what I can tell, he's not explicit about the ethical and political principles of Kant. He is taking it for granted that his audience is well versed in them, which is super strange, right?
Strange, but maybe his audience isn't just a normal person, because he even, I think, I can't remember which letter it was. I think it was maybe like the second or third. It was kind of nicer. He says, well, what audience should I have for this letter but a smart individual like yourself, who is immersed in ideas. So I think that's one interesting thing that we have to take into account with any philosophy text, which is kind of fascinating, is that maybe sometimes we don't think of an audience when we think of a treatise of philosophy. We just think of, I'm just going to get my ideas on the table and blah, 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 like where you're not really focused on an audience. But it seems like, and maybe in the letters, in the form of having letters, is that it's almost this kind of intimate conversation between two people, and he's kind of giving you, or he assumes among friends that, oh, you know what Kant is, you know his ideas.
Well, so. what's crazy is that Schiller was wildly popular. Mm-hmm. Like he was a beloved literary figure. So it's not crazy to think that like people widely understood what he meant when he invoked Kant. Mm-hmm. And how strange that is that I had to go and research. I'm a philosophy PhD, right? And I should qualify that. It's not to defend my dissertation, but I'm a philosophy PhD student. So, and the fact that I had to go and look up some clarification on Kant's political ideas, where at the same time the intelligentsia of Schiller's time would have been like, oh yeah, totally. We totally know what the Kantian program is. Like, that's super astounding and speaks to something of our educational structures now. Mm-hmm. I will say this, and this is a little digression, and we talk about it off cameras or whatnot, is like there are next to no media, like video or auditory media, that address any of Kant's political theory on the internet. So, there are specific talks and things like that, but there's like no one who's addressing the specific like political works of Kant that I could find, because I was looking for a shortcut to figuring this stuff out. I couldn't believe that. So when I have time, I'm going to do that because like it's a massive gap in our new media knowledge. But we're talking about a Kant a lot. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about what ultimately where Schiller wants to go in this Kantian political state. And I think last podcast we set up the dichotomy pretty well, because he's got a problem on his hands that not everyone is ready for this political state, because there are sensual men who are still sort of married to their physical embodiment,
and then the men in the ivory tower.
Yeah, they're the more intelligent, rational people who don't really want to get involved with the cause of the people, and they're really using their reason for self-aggrandizement. Yeah. And that was one of the things I wanted to correct from last podcast too. I used the word barbarous and only applied it to the sensual men, but we had a little bit of dispute about that. You were right to call me out on that, because the word barbarous can apply to both sensual and rational men, because rational men are not necessarily moral, which is going to illustrate why we need art even more. Mm-hmm. Just because you're rational doesn't mean that you understand Kant's ethical truths and then pursue them. You can use that to keep a certain sort of social stratification in your favor and be totally narcissistic and egotistical about the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So that was the second thing I
wanted to bring up. Yeah.
And then there was one more. And
okay.
It's a small little detail.
Shoot. Yeah.
In our finding the connections between Schiller and Nietzsche, I made the illusion in that initial podcast that Schiller would have been closer to Euripides than to Nietzsche, because there is something didactic about the art theory that Schiller is going to put forward, and that is true. That there is something educative and didactic about it, but it's not in the same Euripidean way. Euripides was very explicit about a particular moral that he was trying to implant in the audience, right?
Okay.
Whereas Schiller is trying to take people to a certain place via art. And then from that aesthetic condition that we'll talk about, people will be transformed into ethical beings, but there's not a particular ethical point of view that Schiller is trying to promulgate.
So he's giving you the compass more so than a map, I guess, of where to go. That's what it kind of sounds like. He's giving you like a true north, like this is the state that you should kind of be in. I don't know if that's.
I don't know exactly what the metaphor would be, but
no,
he wants to transport us to a place where we're more likely to become ethical beings.
Right. Like give you like a true north. Like he's giving you a true north. He's not giving you like some kind of agenda or something like you should believe in this.
So I think we set up the problem pretty well about how the splintered society is intact, and Schiller very much wants to get the sensual people elevated to ethical principles to bring about the just state, and he wants to get the rational people more married to sensuality so that they're more bonded with the rest of humanity and can participate in this revolutionary effort as well.
Yeah.
And then we've got to talk about how he's going to do that.
Right. Well, I mean, he says it's like, and you can't. You got two things, and then we just need to add a third thing to that. That to do what you just said, you need something else. And it's almost just like you know the punchline's coming. You're like, oh, it's gonna be aesthetic. It's gonna be beauty. Yeah, it's gonna be freedom. Yeah, but yeah, I think that's what he's saying is that okay, we need to bring in a different sort of thing, because I think I don't know when I think about it sometimes I always think, oh well, we need to just it's almost like a seesaw. I don't really think of it as just we need something completely different to make everything better, which is, I mean, this is going to be the argument of Schiller, is that these two things, I guess the sensual and reason, that you just because you balance them doesn't mean that you have a justice. I think that's what he's kind of saying, and tell me if it's not true, but at least from what's implied in the first couple letters is that even though the things are balanced, there has to be a third thing.
Right.
To bring about actual change, rather than just like, okay, like I am equally reasoned and I'm equally sensual, like we did it. I think that's it.
Well, I think I think so. He starts kind of broaching that subject in like the fourth letter. Mm-hmm. There were a handful of things in like the first, second, and third letter probably need to be in place before we can sort of address that.
Sure, that's fine.
A little bit.
Well, let's go reverse.
But I don't. Do we address everything about your concerns from the last podcast?
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, no, I think we swept everything up under the rug. Let's keep it going.
Okay. So I thought there was and this sounds like minutia, but I didn't get a chance when I did the lecture series and doing this talk and stuff like that. I won't get a chance to talk about this. And if I don't talk about it with you right now, I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to talk about it.
Okay.
And you're going to be like, Jesus Christ, like, why are you getting hung up on this? But I thought this was a really fascinating idea that was in the first letter. Mm-hmm. And he says in the first letter that it is only because of the technical jargon of Kant that makes it so that not everyone is a Kantian. But if you take it out of the jargon, everyone with common sense would agree that Kant got ethics right. Mm-hmm. Okay. But he says that jargon, like, on one level, destroys our natural sense or intuition for a truth, right? But then on another level, it communicates a truth to our understanding.
So a double-edged sword in a
right.
way.
And he's going to try to do that the same thing with his project about art is like in discussing art, he has to walk this very fine line between appealing to what's in our breast and putting it into technical jargon so it can be rationally understood. Mm-hmm. And I guess the main thing I just want to pause for a second and address that issue, because I'll never be able to discuss it anywhere else, is why does jargon do that? And does it do that? And does it necessarily have to do that? Like, why does jargon necessarily have to be so obfuscating in order... Obfuscating is not the right word.
Well, complicated.
Why does it have to be so complicated for us to comprehend it? Why can't you have the best of both worlds? Why can't... And I oftentimes think like the best teachers, and maybe I'm not a good teacher because I don't know how much I do it in my lectures and these podcasts and things like that. Like, a truth is a truth, and you ought to be able to get it out of its jargon and maintain its connection to people regardless of the language that it's in. If you speak in jargon all the time, you're kind of deficient as a teacher, because you're not really serving the truth. You're not connecting the truth to the audience. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, does it have to be this way where the truth is like either intuited or only understood by the hyper intelligent? Can I put the truth into common words? Is this mystifying at all that it has to be put into jargon to be understood?
Yeah, no, I mean that is a great thought. I mean, because you think of, you just said it right there. You're saying like, okay, so what's the point of this jargon? It's only so some people can understand it while other people don't. I mean, when you think of any kind of thing or any kind of like hobby or side thing or whatever, like whether it be art or bass fishing or anything, like everybody has technical jargon, and through that technical jargon, it's that you create this sense of understanding between people. So then you can go up to some guy and say, oh, blah, 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 and they'll be, oh, yeah, I understand that, and have a common language. So it almost seems like jargon is a language in itself for a select people to understand. But then I guess your point is, should it be a select people or should it be everybody?
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering is, like, are we doing philosophy wrong if we have to invent another language?
Right.
Like, why does Kant have to call it the categorical imperative? Why does Schiller have to talk about aesthetic conditions? And
right. Well, it is a love of, philosophy is a love of wisdom, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's for some end. You know what I mean? When I think of some love, it's just like, it's not like, oh, we're going for the greater good. It's like this sensual kind of crazy love. So I don't know, maybe it's a different kind of love if you look at it that way, where maybe we think of philosophy as like, oh, it's supposed to be for the greater good and it's supposed to make us like, why am I living? But maybe it can also just be kind of I don't know.
Is it unnecessarily scientific?
Right, where it's like just like arithmetic masturbation, where it's just like, why the fuck are you doing this? It's like you make no sense. You're talking all this blabber and all that stuff. Like, why? But I think it might go back to that idea where it's just maybe it's just like a communal thing that, oh, these people get me, they understand. There's this common language that creates a kind of unifying bridge between certain people, but it's not everybody. It's not for everybody. That's the problem. But I guess you're saying, like, why shouldn't it be for everybody?
I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, could Kant and Schiller have accomplished their ends without jargon? Mm-hmm. Could they have put it in the language of plain-spoken folk in order to do what they do? Or does the jargon enable them to get closer to the rational truth? But it's like Schiller uses the example of vivisection, where like jargon is like we have to like the only way that we're going to know how to help my dog in the future is if we operate on a living dog for the sake of science. And so it's like we have to almost kill something and splay it open and come to know it and put all this jargon to it so that we can help future dogs or future monkeys or future pigs or future people.
Sure. I mean, that's what he talked about in that letter, about how, as society's going, we have to kind of fix it or understand it. I think he uses the clock analogy where he's like, yeah, you're like, you sometimes fix a clock when the gears are, when you fix a clock, by stopping all the gears and then fixing, but he's like, society's different. Everything is still going, and you kind of have to fix the screw while the
MacGyver
gears are still. Yeah, you have to while the gears are still turning. So yeah, so maybe this jargon is almost kind of MacGyvering. Because when you think of MacGyver, you think of, okay, he's taking a light bulb and he's making a watch with it. He's taking these different disparate elements and creating something new with it. So maybe this jargon is almost, in a sense, taking these disparate elements and creating something new with it to forward our thinking on something. It's almost an additive sort of thing.
I think it is. I think it is true. Thing. I think the thing that's frustrating. I don't think Kant and Schiller would be able to attain the heights of their reasoning had they not had this jargon and this prolix in place. Right. So I'm okay with that. I think the problem for me is that academics in general, and this is off topic, then begin to take that jargon that is so essential for getting to rational truths, such as what is the ultimate moral truth and political end of humanity, and what is art, and what's the point of art. They then start to write everything that way, and then they take things that aren't truths, and they just transport that language into other things and start obfuscating and messing everything up. And
I don't think that's off topic at all, because that's the one side of the coin that Schiller is condemning here. I mean, the other side, of course, is just pure barbarous violence, but this is a violence that maybe we don't think about, because I think we just think of irrational, just crazy, we think of revolution, French Revolution, kind of just it's just everybody's just killing each other and all this stuff. But then there's another
form of suppression,
another form of suppression as well, which he's talking about, the suppression of the sensual and of.
Well, it becomes it becomes a little bit of a jargon. Kind of becomes a tool of power.
Yeah.
It kind of, and what's interesting is that, and I see a lot of academics wielding that tool and using it as a way to separate themselves from the masses, and they're very quick to condemn a lot of other people as unintelligent and lesser. But what I think is in a perfect illustration of this is that this week, I believe it was in the Chronicle of Higher Education or something like that, there was an article about how I believe SUNY Stony Brook is trying to create a program to train intellectuals to be public intellectuals, so they can talk to the public about big ideas. And guess what? So they're going to do workshops. They're going to do workshops to be so let's see if you encounter Joe Sixpack walking down the street, you can tell him about your research. You might want to couch it in this language, or you may want to elevate your voice. They're going to be sitting there trying to train people on how to talk to people. And I just want to tear what remaining hair I have out and just be like, oh my God, just talk to people. You'll learn that way. Just go and do it. Let the process. But we're digressing a little bit. But
I think that's. But
I think it's important to talk about how jargon can be a suppressive political tool.
No, and it plays into, again, like we said, what Schiller is talking about. Because I think this text maybe sometimes can seem bit off in La La Land, or at least written in another time, in another place, where you're just kind of I don't know if it's really relevant. But I think to take it and to take, even if it's just little minutia, and find things that are relevant.
Yeah,
today's times, I think that's perfect. I mean, that's the whole point of reading this in the first place, is to take it and use what, MacGyver it for today. So yeah.
Well, so I think we effectively addressed my concern on that, and I really appreciate you being able to talk about that with me. going on to the second letter, I didn't think he introduced a lot of stuff that we hadn't already talked about in the second letter. I'm cool with the second letter. You cool with the second letter?
I think so. I think.
The third letter, I think I covered a lot about that stuff when talking about what he owes to Kant. So I think we're cool on the third letter.
Okay.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I don't remember much. See, you're saying all these like third letter, second letter. I don't remember much, but
I think we've covered.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I mean
the interesting stuff I believe starts to happen in the fourth letter. Okay, and I think we're at 30 minutes. I think we can spend really the rest of our time talking about the fourth letter. Okay. So we've established that you have physical man who's driven by sensuality, and you have rational man who may have access to the intellectual truths of Kant and others, but doesn't employ them because he's interested in self-aggrandizement and not interested in helping the commonwealth. Okay, so Schiller's going to contemplate two routes in order to get the totality of humanity to the just state. Do you recall what those two routes are?
Two routes
two routes of doing it. He's like we can go this way or we can go this way, and one of these is not going to be an acceptable way to go.
Right. I mean, I'm assuming it's just like violent. I don't know if it's the sensual or the intellectual. I guess.
Yeah, you would like okay,
free man.
Yeah. Kant gave us the program. Kant gave us the ethical and political program. He gave us the map. I don't care if we have to drag the populace kicking and screaming to the just state, but by God, we're going to get them there. That's one route.
Okay.
And the other route is elevating the populace.
To become the state.
To choose the state on their own accord. Okay? Now, the way I've pitched the alternatives here is going to give away what routes Schiller is going to think are legitimate and illegitimate, but I think we need to spell out why one of these routes is not going to be a legitimate route for Schiller. And that's going to be, which one is that going to be?
Probably just be the first one.
Right. So why can't the smart people go and impose the moral state upon all of humanity?
I mean, it almost seems to me...
Why can't all the Schillers get together and say,
sure,
you guys, go take 5, come back when we've got the state all figured out for you. This is your state.
I mean, do you think that's infringing on one's personal freedom? I know Schiller talks a lot about...
Connected back to the Kant.
Connected back to the Kant. Freedom being this pathway for contemplation of beauty and of morality, that taking that freedom away from people might in some way infringe on their basic human rights.
So essentially it's going to be a contradiction in terms, right? If you are going to by force impose the just state on people, like, how just can the state be? It's it's kind of the thinking along. It's kind of like the top down. Like, it's kind of like what we did in Iraq. Like, a lot of people would make the claim that what we did in Iraq was wrong because we tried to impose democracy upon a people that maybe culturally. This is not me speaking. This is critiques of Bush's democratization of Iraq strategy. So I don't want to, because I think there's some racism implicit in this view. A lot of people who were against the Iraq war would say you can't impose democracy on these people because they're not ready for it. I never liked that because I thought it belittled the people. But Schiller is going to say something kind of similar, is that you can't really have a just state if you force people, if it's built on force. All right, it's going to be kind of a contradiction in terms, like, how just can it really be if its foundation is ultimately going to involve punishment and violence and correction and stuff like that. You want, if a state If the just state is truly going to be just, it's going to be because the people have chosen it for themselves through their own freedom. Furthermore, it violates kind of Kantian maxims to just go about and impose the just state on people because it doesn't really honor them as ends. It treats them as sort of, it makes them more pawn-like. Maybe you could argue that, or maybe they just don't know what's good for them. So like you've got to,
right?
You can make the case. I'm like, no, trust me, I'm honoring you. You're just too stupid to understand it. Maybe you can make that case, but that's why the first route is not going to be an option for Schiller. Is that it's going to be just fundamentally paradoxical, and he wants people to choose on their own accord the state, but
there has to be some means for people to choose.
Right. These people, they're not choosing the just state on their own because they're driven by their selfishness, either because they're obsessed with their own rationality or they're obsessed with sensuousness. They can't get it together. So that's why he has to do what?
He has to have art or something. Yeah,
he
got to bring in art as the solution to all of this, as the kind of deus ex machina to like save the day and yay, this is all gonna work out.
So he said, so we've got sensual man all the way over here, and rational man all the way over here. What does Schiller say that we need to do?
I mean, it's just like he said earlier, like we were saying, like we have these two disparate things. We need to create a third thing in order to bring them. Well, not so much to bring them together. I guess to bring them together, but to.
They're not synthesized.
Yeah, no,
they're going to be held. As we go further on, we're going to see that this sensual and this rational impulses and are held in dynamic tension,
right,
in this third condition. It's not like they're married together and they just kind of interpenetrate one another, and it's like the formal and the sensual are brought together. No, they are brought. It's like, you know, when you were a kid and you played with magnets.
Yeah, exactly.
And you would bring two like positively charged magnets together, and you would by force hold them next to each other,
but they always go apart.
But they would repel each other at the same time. I'm really glad we're talking this out because I'm going to use that as an example in my talk.
Sure, yeah.
That's kind of what this third condition is.
Yeah.
Is that it's bringing the sensual and the rational together and holding them in this dynamic tension.
Sure, and the tension is the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or not the solution, but at least it's the way to synthesize these two things in some way, but you can't bring them. I guess the most poignant part about it is that you can't bring them together. Which, I mean, people would argue like, no, yes, you can. Blah, blah, blah.
It's gonna get.
It was kind of like messing with my conception.
As we go further into the book, it gets super weird.
Yeah.
It gets so weird on this stuff because he's gonna say that they tighten and relax each other at the same time, and I'm just like, I can't. I'm like,
sure, like talk about technical jargon and all this. So you're just like, wow, go ahead, Schiller, just keep putting random and just keep building up on your jargon and all this stuff that you.
I'm like, how am I going to explain that? I don't even know what that means, but
no, but I think that's a great place to be, at least at this moment, talking about this. Is that we set up a problem. And then we have Schiller is giving us at least a glimpse of the solution.
What
he's going to articulate it soon, but he's giving us at least.
Yeah, and I think I want to just add this in here, and then I don't have anything else to say. Is that he does not think it's possible for man to jump from the rational and sensual condition straight to the just and ethical state. It's actually easier when this third condition of dynamic tension between the impulses is created, for then people, once they are brought into that third condition, for them then to go to the just state. It's like a board game where you can't pass the person in front of you. You've got to hit this third condition in order to go to the ultimate end.
So the interesting thing implied in that is that even if you do hit the third condition, that doesn't mean that it's the just state.
The third condition is not the just state. The third condition
we think it is, but it's not.
The third condition is actually a precondition for the just state. And so then the question becomes, and I don't have this figured out, the question then becomes, okay, cool. We get to this third condition, and by the way, he's going to think that art is going to transport us to this third condition. So this third condition we call the aesthetic condition, right? There, and how art does this is going to be something we take up in future episodes. But when we get to that aesthetic and third condition, something is going to happen there, and I don't know, like magic, I'm not exactly sure, but from there, we're going to then be able to make the leap into moral and political development. Mm-hmm. Like, something about the experience of art in the aesthetic condition. And this is going to get super weird, dude. Because like when we start talking about what it means to be in the aesthetic condition, he's going to talk about it being like a place of timelessness. Like, like talking about like going to another place, and like when we go to that other place, something about going to that other place is going to allow us to undergo moral transformation internally and to bestow morality and rights onto everybody else. Super ambitious. Yeah. That's crazy talk. So yeah, somehow this painting behind us is,
I think that's such a fascinating thing about these texts on an ideal and just state, or dare we say utopia, is that these are very ambitious. I mean, just the hubris to kind of give some kind of ideal state, like this is how man can survive and thrive in a society, is so not insane, but yeah, just the hubris, and yeah, it's crazy. So I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see what Schiller thinks that the ideal state can be brought about. And of course he's going to say art, which maybe some people are just like, what? Art? Just art? Like, you could just show people Mona Lisa and we're going to all be better.
Yeah, we'll just walk down the street with Mona Lisas.
Yeah,
like, I'm moral now.
Right, where it's the whole idealistic, like I said, the whole hubris kind of thing about trying to describe a utopia, I think it's very noble. And at the same time, it's almost self-defeating with all the technical jargon and stuff. But I think we'll see to the end of this that it is a noble effort by Schiller. Yeah, hopefully we do. But we'll see.
Dude, we're at 42 minutes. I don't have anything else. The fifth letter, I think, imitates what we've already said. And he started talking about the Greeks in the sixth letter, and I was like, you know what? I think we're gonna have enough to talk about tonight. So we'll talk about the Greeks and whatever the heck he has to say in like 6, 7, 8, and 9, like next time.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
CJ.